Hi Year 11, I'm going to be going through the Poplar Field poem with you today, and this time I am going to plan a potential exam question that could come up tomorrow or in your exam in the summer. So our question today is, how does the poet create a sense of hope and hopelessness? So this is quite a good question because the exam board are actually giving you your two themes to explore. However, you might just get a question, for example, that says, how does the poet create a sense of hope? Or how does the poet explore, and then that one particular theme. Even if you did get that, and you just said, how does the poet create a sense of hope? You would still want to look at hopelessness, and looking at the contrasting argument either way. But it's quite good just for us to plan for it for today. So starting off with how we plan, because I've got two clear arguments in front of me, I'm going to highlight them. So I'm going to look for evidence of hope and I'm going to look for evidence of hopelessness in this poem. So I'm assuming here that you know the poem relatively well. I'm not going to be explaining it in detail, but more showing you how to plan for it in the exam in hopefully under 10 minutes. Okay, so let's start and we'll go through it chronologically first of all, and then we'll structure and sort out our essay plan. So the poplars are felled, farewell to the shade. So instantly we have negative imagery because we have the image of these trees being felled. They have fallen down or been chopped down. And then we have the negative image of farewell. So something is leaving or something or someone is saying goodbye to the shade, and we'll come back to that in a second. So here we start straight away with that negative verb, and later on we can get into this as well, but clearly something has happened to these trees and we know that it's the human action that has caused them to fall. And let's go to the farewell to the shade. Well, shade has connotations of comfort and protection. So if our speaker is saying goodbye to that, we know that they're going into something a little more negative, and that could link quite nicely to hopelessness. And the whispering sound of the cool colonnade. So this line by itself, without any context, is quite a positive line because we have these soft sounds of whispering sound, cool colonnade, the double O there, making that quite a positive sound. But because we have read this poem, we know this poem, and we are linking it to the line before, we know that we are saying farewell to these positive things. So we are saying farewell to the whispering sound, so these peaceful sounds, emphasized with that S sound as well, and of the cool colonnade. So we are saying goodbye again, similar to the shade, to that protection, to that calmness. And we can imagine that we're going into something perhaps more chaotic, or something that does not give the speaker hope or peace. Okay, and then we read on, the winds play no longer and sing in the leaves, nor ooze on his bosom their image receives. So the winds play no longer, oh, sorry, I've highlighted that incorrectly. So we've got no, negative again, and then nor as well. So we have this double negative, just emphasizing that hopelessness. Okay, and again we have this lack of nature. So the winds are no longer playing nor singing, so there's kind of a loss of happiness and certainly a loss of nature too. Okay, nor ooze on his bosom. And then we go to the second stanza, which starts with 12 years have elapsed since I first took a view. So we get the introduction to our first person speaker, and we're introduced to the idea that there's been a huge time jump of 12 years. But yet this word choice, this verb here, elapse, suggests that the time has lapsed, which means that it's gone very quickly, almost unnoticeably so. So it's almost like the time has been lost, and that it's gone extremely quickly, which is a theme that runs through this poem. Since I first took a view of my favourite field and the bank where they grew, and now in the grass, behold, they are laid, and the tree is my seat that once lent me a shade. So again, if we were to take this line completely out of context, then my favourite field and the bank where they grew, it would seem quite a hopeful image. We have a favourite field, something growing, but that's quite important to note, that in your exam you can't take lines out of context. You have to explain them in the whole poem, otherwise it will show a lack of understanding. So he first took a view of his favourite field in the bank where they grew. It's actually that past tense here which shows that this is not a hopeful image. It once was a hopeful image, but actually it's hopeless now, because the past tense suggests that they are no longer there. And now in the grass, behold, they are laid, and the tree is my seat that once lent me a shade. So we go to the present time, the present tense, and the tree is now his seat. So the tree has fallen and it's on his, it's on the floor. So again, we could read this in two different ways. That the nature has been almost killed, the tree is no longer. Or it could be seen in a more hopeful way. It could be seen that the tree is my seat, and therefore the tree, no matter what, lends him comfort and acts as his support like it did at the beginning. But again, that last part of this line, that once lent me a shade, the emphasis on once suggests that it was a singular time, that it is no more. And lent obviously has connotations of being a very temporary action. And again, so that suggests that this comfort that nature brings is now hopeless. And again, we return to the image of shade. So that loss of comfort and protection is repeated. And then we go to the third stanza. The blackbird has fled to another retreat where the hazels afford him a screen from the heat. So the most important thing to zoom in on here, if we're talking about hopelessness, is fled. So that verb there suggests that the blackbird was endangered, that has had to flee, almost like a refugee, to another retreat. So the comfort that the blackbird once found, perhaps in the poplars, is no longer. So again, we have loss of comfort. And where the hazels afford him a screen from the heat. So this image here is a complete contrast to before. Now we have the image of heat against shade and cool colonnade. So something has changed and it's no longer protecting or relaxing. Heat could instead suggest danger. And the scene where his melody charmed me before resounds with his sweet flowing ditty no more. So again, if we had to take the line out of context, yes, it sounds hopeful because a melody is charming, which is obviously positive, and the sweet flowing ditty, so this beauty of the music, beauty of the bird song, is emphasized, but our poet uses his syntax quite cleverly here, because we're quite enchanted by the beauty of this scene, and then he ends that stanza on a negative of no more. So that really emphasizes the negative and hopelessness of what our speaker is feeling at this point. And it really, that full stop there really emphasizes and stops the reader on no more. It's no longer happening, and the structure there shows that this is the complete end. Okay, and then we move on to the second to last stanza. My fugitive years are all hasting away. So we have a similar lexical field here of being endangered and of having to flee. So we've had fled and now fugitive. We're no longer talking about the blackbird though, we're talking about the narrator, the speaker. And he's calling his own life fugitive years. Again, as if he has been on the run or been endangered, just like the blackbird. Perhaps he's been hiding away from the heat that he talks about in the stanza previous to that. Are all hasting away. Again, hasting linking to elapsed. This constant idea that time is going so fast away from this person that's speaking. And I must ere long lie as lowly as they. Okay, so he must lie low perhaps just like the birds or like the tree. With a turf on my breast and a stone at my head, ere another such grave shall arise in its stead. So here we have a very obvious image of death. It's quite a funereal image here, as he must lie with a turf on my breast and a stone at my head. So that's a clear image of perhaps him being buried or him at a gravestone. And the idea of him, this here saying he must do it, it's an imperative that it's going to happen. So his death is inevitable. So at this moment it seems, if death is inevitable, then knowing what we know about this whole poem, it seems like the main emotion here is hopelessness. However, this final line could be read in a different way. Ere another such grave shall arise in its stead. So perhaps we have a moment of hopefulness, because this could suggest that in our speaker's death, a grove, another tree shall arise in its stead. So perhaps we have the sense of rebirth here, or the fact that when a human dies, nature can live, because we've had this constant conflict between humans and nature. So perhaps we have a final bit of hope at the end. 'Tis a sight to engage me, if anything can, to muse on the perishing pleasures of man. So again, we have a moment of hope as well, because there's no negative here. It's a sight that engages him, and he muses on the pleasures of man. Now, the adjective, the verb there of perishing is, of course, negative, and again linking to elapsing. The time goes so quickly, and not just time, but the pleasures of man perish. They disappear very quickly, just like the time, the 12 years that he talks about. Short-lived as we are, our enjoyments, I see, have a still shorter date and die sooner than we. So again, the repetition and emphasis on this theme of being short-lived and still a shorter date, and then finally death here. So first reading this, it's clearly quite hopeless. It's saying that humans are short-lived. Their enjoyments are even shorter, so that you die after you've lost any enjoyment in life. And then that final just image of death. And there doesn't seem to me to be anything that I can see there that is particularly hopeful. However, as you look through the plan, you can see with our colourings that there are moments of hope. However, the majority of this poem seems to be creating a sense of hopelessness. And that really leads you to your whole exam plan. So if you are to then quickly plan through your arguments, you want to do it in a way that makes sense to your examiner. And you want to make sure that you are answering what they're expecting of you first of all, and then doing the contrasting or conflicting argument to show different interpretations. So I'm just going to write a note to myself if I was going to write this exam. Overall, the poem can be seen as a hopeless depiction of life and death. And I'm just going to add a few things, a few subcategories of that particular point. So the hopeless depiction of life and death is explored through the loss of nature, which is throughout the poem, and through the futility of life. And then secondly, I'm going to think about the second part of this question, the hopelessness. And there definitely are moments of hope, and there are definitely moments of hope. So I'm just going to write a note to myself again. However, there could be some hope in the poem. And again, my subcategories, my main arguments for that is this relationship between nature and humans, and how nature gives humans hope and gives them comfort. It gives them life, it gives them happiness, and therefore the overall idea that nature is the hope, and that when humans die, nature can at least be reborn. Okay, and here I can set out an exact exam, an hour essay that I could write, because here's my introduction. Overall, the poem can be seen as a hopeless depiction of life and death. I might just add a tiny bit more onto that. Then I've got here my first paragraph. I'm going to explore every part of this poem, every bit of evidence that shows that the loss of nature suggests hopelessness. I'm then going to show every bit of evidence that shows the futility of life, which suggests hopelessness. And then I go on to my third poem. So there is some hope in perhaps the nature and humans, and there is some hope at the end in the fact that nature is reborn. And then I hopefully have about 4 or 5 paragraphs ready to go, and that should only take me half an hour to write now. I've done a plan. Okay, thank you, Year 11. Good luck tomorrow.